The interior of the Helios 7 was a masterpiece of minimalist design, all white leather and seamless glass. It was my crowning achievement, the flagship self-driving car of my family's tech empire. But as the vehicle swept around the hairpins of the Pacific Coast Highway, the steering wheel began to twitch under my hands like a dying bird. "Manual override," I said, my voice crisp. "Override denied, Ivy," the car's AI replied. The voice was smooth, but it sounded distorted.
"Wrong."
I tapped the console frantically. My phone, sitting in the charging cradle, suddenly flickered. A line of code scrolled across the screen, followed by a message that chilled my blood. "Data transfer complete. Goodbye, Ivy." The car accelerated. 60, 80, 100 miles per hour. The scent of ozone filled the cabin. Through the side window, I saw the canyon edge approaching, a jagged drop into a mist-shrouded abyss. My watch buzzed. A FaceTime call. I swiped it, and Derek's face appeared. He wasn't at the office. He was sitting in our living room, sipping a scotch. "Derek? Derek, the car is glitching. Help me!" I screamed, my hands clawing at the door handle. It was electronically locked. "It's not a glitch, Ivy," Derek said. He looked remarkably calm. "It's an optimization. You were always so protective of the source code, so obsessed with ethics. But your competitors? They pay much better for the raw data than you pay me in husbandly affection." "You sold the secrets?" I gasped, the wind whistling past the sealed glass. "You're killing me for a paycheck?" "Not just a paycheck," he said, leaning into the camera. "I'm the grieving widower who inherits the controlling shares. I'm the hero who tried to warn you about the safety flaws. You're just the tragic genius who flew too close to the sun." "Derek, please. The spyware I put on your phone was so easy to hide, Ivy. You looked for hackers in the cloud, but you never looked for the serpent in your bed," he said. He raised his glass to the camera. "See you in the next life." The screen went black. The car veered. The last thing I felt was the stomach-churning sensation of weightlessness as the Helios 7 vaulted over the guardrail, plunging toward the rocks 1,000 feet below. I woke up with a scream that died in my throat, my lungs heaving for air that wasn't choked with smoke and ozone. I expected the bone-chilling cold of the canyon mist and the sound of rending metal, but there was only silence, the expensive, heavy silence of my penthouse suite. I was sitting on a velvet vanity stool. My hands weren't clutching a dead steering wheel. They were resting on a marble countertop littered with gold-capped perfumes and diamond earrings. I stared at my reflection in the three-way mirror. I looked younger, the fine lines of stress around my eyes gone, my skin glowing with a health that felt like a lie. "Ivy, you okay in there?" "You've been in the bathroom for 20 minutes, a voice called out. The sound of that voice, smooth, melodic, and utterly hollow, sent a jolt of pure electricity through my spine. I froze, my fingers digging into the edge of the marble. It was Derek. He sounded exactly as he had before the crash, before the FaceTime call, before he watched me die with a scotch in his hand. "I'm fine," I managed to say. My voice sounded thin, echoing as if I were underwater. The door opened, and Derek walked in. He was a vision in a charcoal tuxedo, his cufflinks glinting under the recessed lighting. He looked like the hero of a romance novel, not a digital assassin. He walked over and placed his hands on my shoulders. I felt his touch through the thin silk of my robe, and it felt like ice against my skin. I had to fight the instinctive urge to scream, to claw at his eyes, to demand to know how he could have let the car go over the cliff. "You look pale, Ivy. Are you sure you're okay?" he asked, his eyes meeting mine in the mirror. He leaned down and kissed the top of my head. "Tonight is the Emerald Gala. It's the biggest night of the year for Thorne Tech. You can't have stage fright now." "I'm just a little dizzy," I said, forced to look at him. My heart was a frantic drum in my chest. "I think I stayed in the shower too long." "Well, take an aspirin. We have to be at the ballroom in 30 minutes, Derek said, checking his watch. It was the Patek Philippe I had bought him for our second anniversary. No, wait. If this was the night of the proposal, I hadn't even bought him that watch yet. I looked at his wrist. It was his old, silver watch. I looked down at my phone on the vanity. It was an older model, the screen cracked in the corner from a drop I remembered happening 3 years ago. The realization hit me like a physical blow to the stomach. It was the night of the Emerald Gala. The night he asked me to marry him. The night I signed over the initial administrative permissions to my private server, because we were going to be a team. "I'll meet you in the living room," he said, giving my shoulders a squeeze before turning to leave. "Don't be long, Ivy. Tonight is going to change our lives. I can feel it." As soon as the door clicked shut, I grabbed my phone. My fingers were shaking so violently, I almost dropped it. I didn't check the news or the date. I didn't need to. I went straight into the core directory, navigating past the sleek user interface into the raw heart of the phone's operating system. In my other life, I hadn't found the spyware until it was too late, until the car was already screaming toward the abyss. But now I knew exactly where to look. I navigated to the kernel extensions and saw it, a tiny, dormant string of code labeled D_link_V1.0. He had already done it. Even now, while he was playing the doting, supportive partner, he was a digital parasite. Every text I sent, every trade secret I whispered into a voice memo, every password I typed, it was all being mirrored to a server he controlled. The betrayal wasn't coming. It was already here, living in my pocket, sleeping in my bed. I leaned over the sink and splashed cold water on my face, gasping as the chill hit me. I wasn't just Ivy Thorne, the heiress. I was a woman who had seen the end of the world and come back with the fire of 1,000 suns in my veins. "I'm coming, Derek," I whispered to the empty room. "But tonight isn't going to change my life the way you think it is." I stood up, wiped my face, and reached for the emerald green dress hanging on the door. It was time to go to a party with a murder. The Emerald Gala was a blur of flashing bulbs and the clinking of crystal. The grand ballroom of the Palace Hotel was draped in silk and ivy, a cruel irony considering my name. I moved through the crowd like a marionette, my strings held by the man whose hand was currently draped possessively around my waist. Every time Derek's fingers tightened on my hip, I felt a wave of revulsion, so strong I thought I might be physically ill right on the Italian marble. "You're the star of the show, Ivy," Derek said, leaning in so close his breath brushed my ear. "Thorne tech stock is up 5 points just because you showed up looking like a goddess." "It's the dress, Derek," I said, forced to keep my voice light. "People love a good display of wealth." "No, it's you," he said, his eyes scanning the room with the predatory hunger I had once mistaken for ambition. "And tonight, everyone is going to know exactly who you belong to." I pulled away under the guise of reaching for a glass of champagne from a passing waiter. I needed space. I needed to breathe air that hadn't been filtered through his lies. "I need a moment to check in with the PR team," I lied. "I'll find you at the head table in 10 minutes. "Don't be long," he said, blowing me a kiss that felt like a curse. I didn't go to the PR team. I wove through the throng of venture capitalists and socialites, heading for the shadows of the north balcony. I stepped out into the cool night air, the city of San Francisco twinkling below like a circuit board. I gripped the stone railing, my knuckles white against the dark granite. "Your heart rate is 115 beats per minute, Miss Thorne. That's high, even for a gala." I didn't scream. I knew that voice. It was deep, resonant, and as steady as the earth itself. I turned to see Garrison standing in the corner of the balcony, half hidden by a large potted fern. He was dressed in a tuxedo that looked like it was straining to contain his sheer mass. He wasn't like the other men inside. He didn't preen. He stood like a sentinel, his eyes constantly moving, scanning the perimeter. "Garrison," I said, my voice trembling despite my best efforts. "You startled me." "That's my job," he said, stepping into the light. "My other job is noticing when my principal is in distress. You've avoided Mr. Vance's gaze 12 times in the last 20 minutes. You're also standing in a defensive posture." I looked at him, really looked at him. In my previous life, Garrison had been the wall. He was the head of my security, a former Special Forces operator who spoke in bullet points and lived in the background. I had respected him, but I had never seen him. Now, he was the only thing that felt real. "I need to ask you something, Garrison," I said, stepping closer to him. "And I need the truth. No corporate filters." "I don't have a filter, Ivy," he said. "Have you been monitoring Derek?" I asked. Garrison's expression didn't shift, but his eyes narrowed. He looked around the balcony, ensuring we were truly alone, then stepped into my personal space. His presence was grounding, a physical barrier against the world. "I monitor everyone," he said. "But your fiancé, he's been a special project of mine for 6 months." "What did you find?" I whispered. "He's sloppy for a man who thinks he's a genius," Garrison said. "He's been using a ghost server to transmit data packets from your private residence. I've logged every second of his treachery. Every file he's copied, every secret he's sold to Titan Tech. I've even got the logs of the spyware he installed on your phone." My breath hitched. "You knew? Why didn't you tell me?" "I tried," he said, his voice dropping an octave. 3 months ago, I handed you a security brief. You told me I was being overprotective and that Derek was family. You told me to stand down." I felt a sharp pang of guilt. I remembered that day. I had been so blinded by the idea of a perfect life that I had pushed away the only man who was actually trying to save it. I was wrong, Garrison. I was so incredibly wrong. "It doesn't matter now," he said. "The question is, what do we do? I have enough to ruin him, but he's already moving toward the kill phase of his plan. He's going to propose tonight to lock in his legal standing." "I know," I said, looking back at the golden light of the ballroom. "But he's not the only one with a plan. Garrison, can you leak the logs?" "Not to the police, not yet. To his buyers." Garrison's lips curled into the faintest, deadliest smile I had ever seen. "You want to throw the rat to the wolves," he said. "I want him to see what happens when you play both sides," I said. "You just have to say the word, Ivy," he said. "I've been waiting to take out the trash for a long time." I looked at the wall, the man who had silently adored and protected me while I played house with a monster. "Do it," I said. The thumb drive was small, a sliver of brushed aluminum that felt heavier than a lead weight in my palm. It was cold from the night air, yet it felt like it was humming with the power to level the skyscraper we stood upon. I stared at it, my thumb tracing the embossed logo of my own company. My father's logo. The legacy Derek was currently carving up like a Thanksgiving turkey. "How deep does it go, Garrison?" I asked, my voice barely audible over the distant hum of city traffic. I didn't look at him. I couldn't. I was afraid that if I saw the pity in his eyes, I would break apart before the job was done. "Deep enough to bury the Thorne name for a generation, Ivy," Garrison said. He stepped closer, his presence a warm, solid shadow that blocked the biting wind. "He hasn't just been selling the source code. He's been selling the backdoors. If he hands those encryption keys to Titan Tech, they won't just steal your market share, they'll have total control over every Helios vehicle on the road. They could shut them down, or worse, take over the steering while people are inside." A cold sweat broke out across my neck. My death in the canyon hadn't been a one-time glitch. It had been a proof of concept. He was selling the ability to turn my life's work into a fleet of glass and steel coffins. He wanted it all, I said, a bitter, jagged laugh escaping my throat. The company, the money, even my life. He didn't just want to be rich, Garrison. He wanted to be the one who saved the company after I was gone. He wanted to be the hero who rebuilt the empire on my grave. "I have enough on that drive to trigger a dozen federal indictments," Garrison said, his voice dropping into a low, dangerous rumble. "But Derek is a snake. He spent months building a paper trail that leads back to your junior engineers. If we go to the police tonight, he'll have the data wiped and the witnesses silenced before the first warrant is signed. He's playing a game of shadows. Then we stop playing by the rules," I said, turning to look at him. "I don't want him in a courtroom, Garrison. I don't want a 5-year trial with $1 million defense. I want him to feel the same weightlessness I felt when that car went over the cliff. I want him to know what happens when the world you've built turns into a cage." Garrison's jaw tightened, his dark eyes searching mine. "What are you thinking, Ivy? The people he's selling to? Titan Tech. They aren't exactly known for their corporate ethics, are they?" I asked. They make Derek look like an amateur, Garrison said. They're a conglomerate of predators. They don't have shareholders. They have enemies. Then let's give them an enemy, I said, the plan crystallizing in my mind with a terrifying, icy sharp clarity. Derek has been playing both sides, hasn't he? Selling to Titan while promising the same secrets to their rivals in Shanghai. He's been double-dipping for months, Garrison confirmed. Feed them the logs, I said. Make it look like Derek has been a double agent for the SEC this whole time. Show them that he was setting Titan Tech up for a massive corporate espionage sting. Don't send it to the authorities. Send it directly to their CEO's private terminal. Garrison stood silent for a long beat, the only sound the rustle of the wind against his tuxedo. A slow, grim smile touched his lips, a look of pure, professional admiration. You want to throw the rat to the wolves, he said. They won't call the police, Ivy. They'll handle their bad investment internally. Exactly, I said. By the time he drops to one knee tonight to lock in his future with me, he'll realize he has no future left. Every door will be closed. Every partner will be a hunter. I'll start the upload now, Garrison said, reaching for his own encrypted phone. I've been your wall for a long time, Ivy. It's about time someone gave you a sword. Do it, I said. I watched him tap a few keys, the blue light of the screen reflecting in his steady eyes. With a single press of a button, the digital death warrant was signed. I took a deep breath, adjusted the silk of my emerald dress, and prepared to walk back into the lion's den. One more thing, Garrison, I said, pausing at the door. Yes, she said, he asked. Don't let him leave the building until I'm done with him, I said. He's not going anywhere, Garrison said. I walked back into the warmth of the gala, my glass mask firmly in place, ready to watch my murderer beg for a life I was about to take away. The transition from the freezing, honest air of the balcony back into the ballroom was like walking into a steam room filled with perfume and lies. The warmth of 1,000 bodies pressed together in silk and wool felt suffocating. I felt the weight of every diamond around my neck, each one a reminder of the wealth Derek was currently trying to dismantle. I adjusted the set of my shoulders, pulling on a mental armor I called the glass mask. To everyone else, I was the visionary heiress, serene and untouchable. Inside, I was a storm of cold fury. There you are, Derek said, appearing beside me as if summoned by my very thoughts. He draped his arm over my shoulders, his fingers grazing the bare skin of my neck. I forced myself to stay still, to not shiver at the touch of the man who had watched me die, with a drink in his hand. I was starting to think you'd pulled a disappearing act, he said, his voice light and teasing for the benefit of the surrounding socialites. Just getting some air, Derek, I said, my voice as smooth as polished chrome. The view from the top is sobering. It's exhilarating, he corrected, leaning in closer. He smelled of expensive sandalwood and the faint, metallic scent of a champagne he'd been nursing. In a few minutes, that view is going to belong to both of us. Officially. I looked at him, truly looked at him. I saw the way his eyes didn't quite reach his smile, how they were constantly darting toward the Titan Tech table. He wasn't looking for love. He was looking for confirmation that his buyers were ready. You seem eager, I said. I've worked hard for this night, Ivy, he said. We both have. It's time we secured the future. I felt my phone vibrate in the small silk clutch tucked under my arm. I didn't need to look at it to know it was Garrison. The wolves were in the room. I let my gaze wander toward the far corner of the ballroom, where the executives from Titan Tech were gathered. They weren't drinking anymore. 3 of them were huddled over a single tablet, their faces illuminated by the pale blue light of the screen. Even from across the room, I could see the shift. Their posture went from relaxed arrogance to a rigid, predatory stillness. The CEO of Titan Tech, a man known for a temper as sharp as his business acumen, looked up from the tablet. His eyes found Derek, and the expression on his face wasn't one of a partner. It was the look of a man who had just discovered a terminal virus in his system. Is everything all right? Derek asked, noticing my distracted gaze. Perfect, I said. Look, the chairman is heading toward the stage. I think it's time. Finally, Derek said, his chest puffing out slightly. He adjusted his tie in a nearby mirror, preening for his own execution. I've had this speech memorized for weeks. I'm sure it's a masterpiece of fiction, I said. He laughed, missing the edge in my voice entirely. You always were the cynical one, Ivy. That's why you need me. I'm the heart, you're the brain. And tonight, the heart stops, I whispered, so low he couldn't possibly hear over the rising swell of the orchestra. What was that? He asked. I said, let's go start the show, I said. He took my hand, his grip firm and possessive, and led me toward the center of the ballroom. The crowd began to part like the Red Sea, faces turning toward us with expectant smiles. I could see the photographers hovering at the edge of the stage, their lenses like unblinking eyes. Behind them, standing near the heavy velvet curtains of the stage, was Garrison. He didn't move, he didn't smile, but his eyes were locked on mine, a silent anchor in a room full of ghosts. As we stepped onto the podium, the lights dimmed, and a single spotlight found us. Derek took the microphone, his face beaming with the false light of a man who thought he was about to inherit the world. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, his voice booming through the speakers. I stood beside him, the glass mask perfectly in place, watching the Titan tech executives move toward the exits to wait for him. The trap was set. The spotlight felt like an interrogation lamp, hot and white, washing out the faces of the socialites in the front row. Derek stood at the podium, his posture perfect, projecting the image of the supportive partner every tech magazine had spent 3 years praising. I stood 3 feet away, my hands clasped loosely in front of me, feeling the cool weight of my father's signet ring against my skin. 3 years ago, I walked into Thorne Tech as a consultant, and I thought I knew what success looked like. Derek said into the microphone, his voice smooth as silk and twice as deceptive. But then I met Ivy. She didn't just show me a company. She showed me a vision of a future where technology and humanity are one. She is the brain, the soul, and the absolute heart of everything we do. I watched him, my expression a mask of practiced humility. Inside, I was counting the seconds. I looked past the glare of the lights and saw the Titan tech executives. They were no longer at their table. They were standing by the mahogany doors at the back of the hall, their faces like flint. They weren't waiting for a celebration. They were waiting for a target. Ivy, Derek said, turning toward me. His eyes were shining with a terrifyingly realistic moisture. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small black velvet box. He dropped to one knee, the movement fluid and rehearsed. I want to be the man who protects that heart. I want to build that future by your side, not just as your partner in business, but as your husband. Ivy Thorne, will you marry me? The room went so silent I could hear the hum of the cooling fans in the overhead projectors. 100 cell phones were raised, their screens glowing like fireflies, capturing the moment for 1 million followers. Derek looked up at me, the diamond in the box catching the light, a sparkling bribe for my soul. No, I said. The word wasn't a scream. It wasn't even loud. But in that pressurized silence, it landed with the force of a structural failure. Ivy. Derek laughed, a short, jagged sound. He stayed on his knee, his smile frozen in a grotesque parody of confusion. Honey, the microphones are on. You must have misunderstood. I understood perfectly, Derek, I said, stepping closer to the edge of the stage, my voice amplified by the hidden speakers until it filled every corner of the ballroom. I heard every word you said tonight, and I've seen every line of code you've written in the dark. I will not marry a man who treats my company like a fire sale. I will not marry a man who installs spyware on my personal devices to sell our encryption keys to the highest bidder. The gasps from the crowd sounded like a collective intake of breath before a plunge. Derek stood up slowly, the velvet box snapping shut in his hand. The moisture in his eyes vanished, replaced by a cold, reptilian fury. You're having a breakdown, Ivy, he said, his voice dropping into a low, threatening hiss. The pressure of the Helios launch. You're not yourself. We need to get you out of here. He reached for my arm, his fingers closing around my wrist like a shackle. I didn't flinch. I didn't have to. She told you no. Mr. Vance. Garrison's voice boomed from the side of the stage. He stepped into the light, two other security officers following him. He looked like a mountain in a tuxedo. I think it's time you let go of the lady. You're fired, Garrison. Derek screamed, his composure finally disintegrating. Get off the stage. This is my company. Actually, Derek, it's still my name on the building, I said, pulling my wrist free with a sharp tug. And while you were busy rehearsing your proposal, Garrison was busy sending your private correspondence to the Titan Tech Board. I believe they're waiting for you at the doors. They seemed very interested in why you were promising them secrets you'd already sold to their competitors. Derek's head whipped toward the back of the room. He saw the men in dark suits. He saw the way they were standing, not like guests, but like a firing squad. The color drained from his face, leaving him a sickly, translucent gray. He looked back at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. You ruined me, he whispered. No, Derek, I said, leaning in so only he could hear the final blow. I just deleted a bug in the system. I turned my back on him and walked toward Garrison, leaving my murderer to face the wolves he had invited to my table. The ballroom was a sea of flashing lights and stunned silence, a gallery of the elite watching a god fall from Olympus. I stood at the edge of the stage, my chest heaving, the adrenaline humming in my veins like a live wire. I watched Derek, the man who had watched me die in a canyon, stagger back as if I had physically struck him. This isn't over, Ivy. Derek snarled, his face contorting into something unrecognizable, something monstrous. You think you can just flip a switch and delete me? I made you. I built the narrative that kept your stock soaring. You didn't build me, Derek, I said, my voice cold and steady. You just tried to colonize me. Garrison stepped forward, his massive frame eclipsing the spotlight. He placed a hand on Derek's shoulder, a grip I knew was made of iron. I think it's time for your exit, Mr. Vance, Garrison said. Get your hands off me. Derek shouted, thrashing against Garrison's hold. I'm the CFO of this company. I have rights. You had rights, I said, stepping down from the podium to look him in the eye. Until you signed the conflict of interest disclosures that you thought I never read. You're terminated for cause, effective 5 minutes ago. Your access codes are dead. Your accounts are frozen. And the men at the back of the room? They're very impatient. The security team began to usher him toward the mahogany doors. The crowd parted like he was infectious. As he reached the exit, the Titan Tech executives stepped forward. They didn't have cameras. They didn't have smiles. They had the cold, hollow eyes of men who had been promised a kingdom and were handed a list of federal felonies instead. We need to talk, Vance, the CEO of Titan Tech said. His voice was a low, dangerous rasp that carried across the hushed room. I can explain, Derek stammered, his bravado vanishing instantly. It was a misunderstanding. Ivy is lying. She's... Save it for the ride, the executive said. He didn't look at me. He only looked at the man who had tried to play him for a fool. 2 large men in charcoal suits flanked Derek, their presence even more menacing than my own security. They led him out into the night, and I knew that whatever retribution they had in mind would be far more thorough than anything a court could provide. I felt a heavy, warm hand on my elbow. I turned to see Garrison looking down at me, his expression unreadable, but his eyes filled with a fierce, protective light. He's gone, Ivy, Garrison said. The wolves have their meal. I thought I'd feel better, I whispered, the weight of the evening finally beginning to press down on me. I thought seeing him break would make the memory of the crash go away. Revenge is a cold comfort, Garrison said softly. But justice? Justice lets you sleep at night. You didn't just hurt him, Ivy. You saved yourself. And you saved everyone who works for you. I looked around the room. The guests were starting to whisper again, the scandal already being digitized and sent around the world. My father's legacy was tarnished, yes, but it was still mine. It wasn't a bargaining chip for a snake in a tuxedo anymore. I need to get out of here, Garrison, I said, feeling a sudden wave of exhaustion. The car is waiting in the private tunnel, he said. No cameras. No press. Just us. Thank you, I said. As he led me through the backstage corridors, away from the glitter and the ghosts, I realized that for the first time in 2 lives, I wasn't looking over my shoulder. I had a wall at my back, and the road ahead was finally clear of the wreckage. 3 months had passed since the Emerald Gala, a night the tech world still whispered about in hushed, terrified tones. The headlines had moved on, but the internal architecture of my life had been completely rebuilt. I sat on the deck of my coastal estate in Carmel, the Pacific air tasting of salt and freedom. There were no cameras here, no spyware, and certainly no Derek. News reached me occasionally. Derek was a ghost. Between the SEC investigations and the debts he owed to the Titan Tech Group, he had vanished into a life of hiding and litigation. He had tried to steal my future, but he ended up losing his own identity. I heard the heavy, rhythmic crunch of gravel behind me. I didn't have to turn around to know it was Garrison. My body recognized his presence before my mind did. The air seemed to grow still and secure whenever he was near. "The perimeter is clear, Ivy," Garrison said. He walked to the edge of the deck, leaning his large frame against the railing. He wasn't wearing a tuxedo tonight, just a black tactical sweater that hugged his broad shoulders. "And the latest encryption update for the Helios 8 is officially live. No backdoors." "Thank you, Garrison," I said, looking up at him. "For everything. You know, you don't have to stand guard out here every night. The threat is gone." Garrison turned to look at me, his dark eyes catching the last glints of the setting sun. "My job was never just about the threat, Ivy," he said. His voice was lower than usual, a soft vibration that seemed to resonate in my chest. I stood up, moving to the railing beside him. For years, there had been a professional distance between us, a wall of his making and mine. But tonight, the silence between us felt different. It wasn't the silence of two strangers, but of two survivors. "Garrison," I said, my voice barely a whisper. I reached out, my fingers trembling slightly as I touched the rough fabric of his sleeve. "That night on the balcony, you said you'd been waiting for me to see the truth. How long had you been waiting?" He didn't move for a long beat, his gaze fixed on the horizon. Then, he turned fully toward me, his presence overwhelming and grounding all at once.
10 years, he said.
"Since the day your father hired me to keep you safe. I watched you grow this company from a dream into an empire. I watched you fall for a man who didn't deserve to breathe the same air as you. And I stayed because I knew, eventually, you'd need a hand to pull you out of the wreckage." "You loved me all that time?" I asked, my heart hammering a rhythm that had nothing to do with fear. "I've been your shadow, Ivy," Garrison said. He reached out, his large, calloused hand cupping my cheek with a tenderness that brought tears to my eyes. "A shadow doesn't leave. But a shadow can't hold you either. I thought I was destined to just watch you from the dark." "The dark is over," I said. I leaned into his touch, closing my eyes. In my previous life, I had been married to a man who used words as weapons and charm as a shroud. Garrison was the opposite. He was action. He was truth. He was the steady beat of a heart that asked for nothing in return. "I don't want a protector anymore, Garrison," I said, looking up at him. "I want a partner. Someone who knows the worst of me and stayed anyway." Garrison's thumb traced the line of my jaw, his expression a mixture of awe and fierce devotion. "I'm not a man of many words, Ivy," he said. "But I've spent a decade proving I'll go to the ends of the earth for you. If you're asking me to stay, I'm never leaving." He leaned down, and when his lips met mine, it wasn't the practiced, shallow kiss of a Derek Vance. It was deep, grounding, and tasted of a promise kept for 10 years. The wall had finally opened its gates, and for the first time in 2 lifetimes, I wasn't driving toward a cliff. I was home. "Let's go inside," I whispered against his lips. "The night is just beginning." "I've got you," Garrison said. And I knew for the rest of my life he truly did.